Take a network break. Choose from our fine selection of virtual donuts and join us as we peruse this week's tech news. We've got a hardware-heavy show, including a new switch from Dell, a new silicon from Broadcom, plus Nvidia's insane financial results and more. We don't have any Tech Bites or sponsors today, but I did like to remind you we do have more podcasts. You can check out Packet Protector. It's our new security podcast with yours truly and Jennifer Manella. We have Network Automation Nerds with Eric Cho, Heavy Wireless with Keith Parsons, and many more. It's all at packetpushers.net. And a reminder, we have a job board if you're either looking for a new role or looking to hire. And of course, you can always talk to us, reach out to us at packetpushers.net/FU or join our Slack community to share tips and swap snark with other network engineers. That's at packetpushers.net/community.
Oh, I've got a donut tip for you this week, Greg.
Oh, yes, please.
I don't know if I've ever talked about this before, but one of the things that I like is I like my donuts to be a little crispy. This is not jam donuts or custard donuts, but when you get the donut in the supermarket and they're kind of soggy.
Sure,
and
yeah.
bready.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever buy donuts from the supermarket.
I do.
They're kind of gross, and you don't buy them. I discovered that if you put them in the air fryer for 5 minutes on air fryer, actually crisp up very nicely and they actually become so. I have this theory that if you shop bought donuts, if you're making them right, one way to squeeze a bit of profit out is to actually cook them a little bit less, or maybe cook them at a cooler temperature, and you can actually upcycle. Is that what you call?
I guess, yeah.
Upcycle,
refresh,
upgrade, fancy up. POV up. POV is a word in the UK where it says if you're in poverty mode, you can buy the cheap donuts, but you can turn them up into something. Put them in the air fryer for like 5 minutes, and they become crispy, and the inside gets really fluffy and light. It does kind of work with jam donuts. I seem to remember doing that, but I gave up jam donuts because they're unhealthy, as opposed to just donuts.
We all have choices to make.
But yeah, there you go.
All right, there's a tip.
Well,
tip.
I'm not a big fan of the custard donuts.
Mm-hmm.
In today's show, if you've actually got physical donuts, rev them up in the air fryer, some sort of oven or heating. A microwave doesn't work. It does a different thing. It turns them soggy. You might notice I've actually done some kitchen testing to get there. So yeah.
I want to see your lab notebook on this donut testing. Yes. Microwave versus air fryer versus
off the shelf, soggy, sort of not very well baked, but delicious because sugar and fat and flour. What goes wrong?
It's a great
they
combination.
Need to have that little extra. So if you're in povo mode like me, go out and ram them in the air fryer for a few minutes, and then you'll get this crispy, luscious donut. It's really quite something.
All right, that might be our first physical donut tip we've done on the show. So
might be the last as well. I really can't think how many more donut tips could you actually have.
First and only.
It doesn't work with Krispy Kreme donuts, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, it doesn't work with Krispy Kreme donuts because they're covered in ick. Because the donut they make is so disgustingly bad that they actually cover it in ick so that you don't notice how much full of they are, because they get made and then shipped all the way across the country. So they're full of ick stuff that keeps them. I mean, if you're going to sit a donut in a garage, for 2 or 3 days before it sells, it's got to be full of something so it doesn't die.
Precisely. Right? Yes. All right, let's switch from donuts to switches. At the recent Dell World event, Dell Technologies announced a new data center switch for Ethernet fabrics to support AI use cases. The new Dell Power Switch includes a Broadcom Tomahawk 5. It offers 64 ports of 800 gig Ethernet for a total of 51.2 terabits per second throughput. Most of the AI workload supporting benefits in the switch do come from that Broadcom, including support for Rocky V2, dynamic load balancing, and congestion control. These are all features built in to prevent packet loss and retransmission, which can hamper AI workload processing. The switch is running Enterprise Sonic, which is Dell's distro of the open source Sonic Network OS.
There's lots of observations you can make here is that the companies who are dependent on Broadcom for the ASICs to go inside of their switches are really reliant on whatever Broadcom ships to be able to produce an AI networking capability. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to draw a sort of a comparison between what Nvidia is doing and what all the other traditional vendors are doing, it's just like night and day. Nvidia's gone, we're going with InfiniBand because it works. And it is high speed, 400 gig InfiniBand. It has very low latency. It doesn't drop packets. It has, this committed bandwidth capability. And everybody else has abandoned InfiniBand years ago. There's only 2 companies left making it. One is Marvell, and the other one is Mellanox Nvidia, right?
Yep.
And so you have the situation where companies like Dell, who've all gone down that we don't want to do networking. Networking's not core business for us. And so we're just going to buy whatever Broadcom sells us, and that's enough. And for a long time, networking, data center networking for enterprises doesn't really need what's going on. It's all been focused on what's going on in the hyperscalers. And all of a sudden AI networking's come along and it's left them a bit short. Like we haven't seen them and they're all sort of working with the AI Ethernet consortium to try and build a highly available, low latency, lossless fabric out of Ethernet. But, what are we, a year into that cycle? When do we talk about AI Ethernet group, the Ultra Ethernet Forum?
The Ultra Ethernet Consortium, yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah.
About a year.
It's been a while, and they're still not anywhere, right? So they've got a version 1 overview white paper, if you want to read that, and it sort of talks about some bits and pieces, but it all comes down to the fact that, like, legacy Ethernet is the greatest thing, and you can't have anything but more Ethernet, right? And I'm becoming sort of slowly more believing in IB for the indefinite future. I think InfiniBand, by the time Ultra Ethernet comes out with a viable transport and it flows through into the chipsets and the software, it's entirely possible that IB might be the way to go, in the same way that fiber channel remains the primary way of connecting storage networking, right? You wouldn't say that fiber channel's been displaced by Ethernet in the last decade or so, no matter how hard people have tried. I think if the InfiniBand people wake up and go, you know what the natural upgrade is to fiber channel? It's InfiniBand. I think, fiber channel is like a $15 billion a year networking business. If you could go back to them and say, your, 64 gig fiber channel is not cutting it. We've got 400 gig InfiniBand, up to 400 gig, 200 gig, 100 gig InfiniBand. You should use that. I think that's a viable thing. And I wonder if that will happen. Now, this is pure speculation. All of the companies are throwing their money behind Ethernet. But, the thing is that you've got to be able to, you're talking about radical changes to the whole Ethernet thing. It's a multipath packet spraying. They've got rate control algorithms, in-cast managed mechanisms. They've got APIs for outer order packet deliver. They've got scaling because they're trying to sell something that the mega clouds want. So they're talking about they want to be able to build a lossless fabric for 1 million endpoints, as well as, congestion algorithm, all for a protocol which is designed to lose frames. So, in the 20, 30 years, 40 years that I've been involved with Ethernet, we've never made it lossless unless we use a switch at, say, half capacity. But even then, you still risk incast. And of course, with AI, you've got to run the whole switching fabric at 100%. There's no, if you've got a 400 gig interface to a server, you can expect to use all 400 gigs at 100% on a sustained basis for hours and hours and hours, days and days and days, right? And so the idea that you can somehow produce this high quality, fully stable, reliable software where the whole network is managing, like all of the switches are agreeing on buffering algorithms and flow parameters and communicating with each other in real time. Like all of those switches have to be agreeing with each other that this flow gets this priority and this flow and, all that sort of, and they've got to be application aware because if the AI processing, that to me just sounds like something that my instinctive reaction is to go like, if wishes were fishes, I'd cast spell to catch them sort of thing, right?
Sure.
And it just doesn't sound possible. If you then say, but yeah, we can probably make it work, my instant reaction is this is not software that's easy to develop. You're talking about real-time, nanosecond scale, coherence between different switches. That is not something that networking has traditionally done. It has not been a real time. It's usually been a fire and forget, near enough is good enough. That'll do. So, throw away 1% of packets. That's okay. We'll just recover them, whatever. And so I really am struggling with a vision where Ethernet can work. And as they say in RFC 1925, with enough thrust, pigs fly just fine. And I do believe that plenty of thrust has been thrown at this problem.
Oh, yes.
But I guess my point is that if you figure that it's not a year away to me. It feels like, and the flip side of this is that I just don't know how much money is here in this AI market. Like right now, the AI market feels incredibly frothy. There's so much money being thrown at it because it's the only thing, and the venture capitalists. But venture capitalists can turn against it really quickly. And out of the $300 billion that we've spent so far in AI, I was reading a report and they said $300 billion spent. And now they're saying that there's been $2 billion in revenue taken from it. And really? So the pathway to profitability or the pathway to value in AI, it doesn't feel like some of the other cycles that we've had. right? So if you look at some of the other technology, they delivered value from day one, whereas AI is a much more of a mixed story to me. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. I don't know that, outside of some limited use cases, we've, really demonstrated the value, particularly around generative AI, despite all of the investment and interest in it. It seems to me more like, yeah, as you said, froth, sort of wishful thinking, hoping, yeah, we'll find something for it because it's so cool. But yeah,
it feels a bit like blockchain at the moment. There's definitely something there.
There's definitely a little bit of a blockchain vibe. Like, I think I could see something here. We just need to find the right application and use case, and then everybody will get on board. And I mean, I guess you could say that, crypto has been very successful because of blockchain. So there is that. But crypto also has its issues.
I'm not convinced that crypto has actually delivered anything of substantial value. Like, Sure. If you own some crypto coins and you're trading them for value, but you could equally do that with Beanie Babies or stamps, right? You could be whatever collectible you want. Nominally, there's a sort of a delusion of value around crypto that is the same as the delusion of cash, right? If I present you a piece of paper that's marked as a bill, there's a delusion that there's a value associated to that.
Yes.
But I'm not sure. Anyway, I guess the point is to come back to Dell networking for AI. The big point about their pitch was they've got this Z98 64F ON brand new switch with the Jericho 3 AI, which has the enhanced buffering capabilities, and sort of got features in it that make it relevant for AI. And it's also teamed up with the Broadcom Thor 2 NIC. Now, the Broadcom Thor 2 NIC is something that Broadcom has been working on for a while. The Thor 2 has been around for 4 or 5 years. There was Thor 1, Thor 2, Thor 4, and the Thor 2 is, now they've released a 400 gigabit per second version of this. So it's bidirectional, throughput, low latency. So basically, this is just a very good NIC. It's not a smart NIC, as best as I can tell. Like, it doesn't have a full-on smart NIC capability where it's got an FPGA. So if you go and look up the data sheet that's associated with it, it looks to me like it's a NIC, just a fancy NIC. If you know what I mean. I've often talked about, but it's no DPU. It's probably not even a smart NIC as best as I can tell. It's a 400 gig NIC dedicated in AI servers, and away you go. When you read the product sheet, it talks particularly about being Rocky V2. So it supports most of the Rocky V2 functions, if not all of them, and particularly has like a bunch of the newer Rocky V2 standards, things like DCQACN, which is congestion notification, peer memory direct, distributed congestion notification, automated configuration. So the idea is in Rocky that the configuration of the NICs is coherently distributed between all of them, right? So the first of the Broadcom NICs to maybe support all of the features that you want ready to do InfiniBand emulation, because Rocky is effectively InfiniBand emulation over Ethernet. But to me, probably the surprising part about this is they're using Sonic. So the Sonic OS, which Dell has been investing in for a long period of time, and their Smart Fabric Manager, which is basically just around, identifying flows and managing flows and all that sort of stuff. So Dell is saying we can build an AI networking capability today using our not very serious off in the corner networking capability, and now all of a sudden it's front and center for AI. I'm having a hard time finding that a positive strategy. If I was buying it, I'd want to be looking really closely at the chops here and saying, yes, Mr. Dell, I'm sure, your commitment to Sonic goes back over years, but it's not been a total commitment, right? They've been pushing out Sonic, playing around with Smart Fabric Manager for a very long time, but it's not like they've been over-investing in it to turn it into a Cisco ACI competitor or a Glueware or an iTensor type stuff. It's literally just some Ethernet. It's a very simple, or as best as I can tell, a fairly simple basic tool for building an Ethernet fabric and doing some VXLAN. That's really about it.
Yeah. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think all of the capabilities that make an Ethernet fabric suitable for running an AI workload on top of are coming through the ASIC. There's really not much for the switch to do except sort of get out of the way. I think it makes sense for Dell to be like, yeah, we've got the Broadcom ASICs you want if you're looking to build an AI fabric, and maybe our switch is slightly cheaper than the usual suspects. So that's their use case. And of course, if you are building an AI fabric, maybe you want Sonic. I don't know, but
I don't think the actual OS matters a great deal. True.
I don't really either. Yeah, again, it kind of get out of the way of the congestion control mechanisms that are happening in the ASIC. That's really what you need to be worried about.
I think using Sonic, Dell has taken an open source project and made it their own, and that's fine. Whether you think open source has legs in enterprise or not, and I've been questioning that lately.
I don't think there's a huge appetite for Sonic in the enterprise. There is in the cloud, but
no.
Yeah.
But if I can buy Sonic from Dell, definitely, sure, fine. And Dell gets the advantages of contributions from other parties. Hopefully, they're contributing something back. Now, the flip side of this is, can they put the feature? Like, the question is, how many developers have they got working on this? What sort of testing are they doing? What product management going on? Are they committing enough resources to this to turn this networking into something that's viable? Now, if you told me that HPE Aruba was doing this, I'd be with you, right? It'd be like, yes, they've got resources. If you said Cisco's building an AI networking strategy, yes, they've got the history, the people, the focus, the push, all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But with Dell, I've definitely had the impression that their networking is kind of like, we just want to sell servers, and sometimes we have to sell a network with them. So we've got just enough networking to do that when we need to sell a hyper-converged bundle, right?
Yep.
Well, now all of a sudden the network is the weak point in all of that chain. Sure, it's about GPUs and AI processors, and you can go to Intel and get a Gaudi 3 and drop it into a Dell server and go through some sort of homologation process, and fine. But the challenge here is that what happens to the networking, and that's a completely different kettle of fish, because Broadcom doesn't get involved in Sonic. It doesn't get involved in the software. It doesn't help you like Intel does with its, support for Linux and so forth.
Yeah.
So, and this NIC is not a DPU. So where's the DPUs? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I remain convinced that the long term, not immediately, I would want to be using a smart NIC today and moving to a DPU as quickly as possible, so that I'm not leaning into the general purpose CPU or even the GPUs. I should not be doing I/O functions in the GPUs. They should be allocated to AI, and that's where the DPU comes in. But as I've said before, I think the DPU is still a few years away. If somebody's doing something with it, it's the mega clouds, it's the Metas, the AWSs, the Googles, the OpenAIs, because they've got the resources and purpose and focus to do that. And I think this is a nominal first attempt, but I don't think it's where we're going to end up.
My assumption is Dell is probably selling more servers into the AI market than they are switches. And if they're selling you, I don't know, an insane number of servers, they could be like, we'll give you a deal on the switches, essentially like we'll chuck them in for free if you to build that fabric. And we've got the same
part of the package.
Yeah, we've got the same ASIC that everybody else is using. So
I think we're seeing the rise of hyperconverged, or what I think of as mini computers. Mm-hmm. If you're old enough and ugly enough to have been around for mini computers, you can buy the Dell AI. Dell is talking, and this is all driven by Dell World 2024, by the way, right?
Yes.
So, and Dell has a whole, what it calls this AI factory. So the idea is that you would go to Dell and buy a piece of equipment that is an AI factory, and it involves servers and EMC storage and the power scale storage array. And this is the networking that you're going to get. You're not buying these in pieces. You're buying these as comprehensive, as a mini computer.
Essentially,
Here's 3 racks of equipment. Yeah,
it's still back to the some pieces you have to integrate, but you're getting it all from one place, and presumably they should all work well together.
Well, you don't even have to integrate them. Dell ships it to you as a pre-configured rack, right? The same way as So, and it's a blessed solution, and it's got, you can have any color you like as long as it comes from this selection of A1 to, small, medium, or large. You don't get to say, I want this CPU with that storage. You get a power scale, and they've gone and they make certain guarantees, and they do their own testing out in Texas somewhere. They have a lab that takes these servers with these NICs on this version of VMware or whatever, right? And get it all going. One thing I will note is, I was reading the manual for the Broadcom Thor 2 NIC, and it talks about a thing called TrueFlow. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And it turns out that TrueFlow is a hardware offload of a packet flow classifier on the Broadcom Ethernet adapter. This allows control of the packet based on flows determined by matching well-known packet fields and metadata. And then I thought, that sounds like OpenFlow. And then it says, the flow classification can be described either by OpenFlow, implemented in the open.
Oh, my.
So there you go. Old technologies never
Surprise.
die.
Yeah. What's underneath your AI Ethernet fabric? It's OpenFlow. Who would have guessed?
Which I thought was deeply amusing. And now it's just a part of what's happening for a lot of things. And that's very common. A lot of people use OpenFlow rules, or we call it P4, but it's actually OpenFlow by and large.
All right, links in the show notes if you want to read up on it. We'll move on. The cloud networking startup Alkira has raised $100 million in a C round of funding. The company has now raised a total of $716 million. Alkira basically provides an overlay service across multiple public clouds. It has what it's called a cloud exchange points in all the major public cloud providers, and you can use these to connect via SSL, IPsec VPNs, or SD-WAN. You get one operating model to connect all your resources to and across different public cloud networks. And Alkira's got another $100 million to take this message to the world.
I think this is interesting because there's a signal here that I think it might be worth considering. The NAS market emerged looking like it was going to be the next SD-WAN. And then, of course, SD-WAN went off to become SASE and then SSE and then become replacing remote access. And that all happened during the COVID and post-COVID transition. Mm-hmm. The fundamental idea of network as a service is that if you've got software overlays, which is what SD-WAN was, then why don't you just connect anything to anything? Instead of SD-WAN being hardware to hardware, what about if you could connect it to an off-prem cloud, particularly about the off-prem cloud networks like Google Cloud and AWS and Azure, because a lot of enterprises end up with all of them. Right. And Oracle Cloud. Yep. And then you've got your on-prem, and then you've got your branch network. So we try and isolate these into smaller Okay, so the idea behind network as a service was that there were software overlays that connected anything to anything. But most importantly, they started off by connecting the proprietary off-prem cloud network. So Google, AWS, Azure, how are you going to connect all them into one thing, as well as connecting to your on-prem data center, as well as connecting to your branches or to your remote access users? And so Alkira was one of the first companies to offer that as a managed service. It's sort of a cross between a managed service and a product. It's kind of interesting in the sense that, it's all this virtually hosted stuff, and they have nodes in all of the clouds, and they have backbone bypass, some of them. But Alkira was one of the first companies to say, well, we're going to start introducing network functions virtualization, and you can have firewalls and load balancing. And this solution, if you haven't heard of it, it may be because you're not inside of a very large company. If you're a very, very large company who's got this massively distributed IT estate and there's something everywhere, the people that I've spoken to who are using these sort of network as a service products are saying, I've got stuff in Azure and AWS and other third-party data centers and Oracle Cloud and, even Huawei and Alibaba. How do you turn that network into one thing,
right,
so that it can be operated on?
Yeah, and what Alkira gives you is that single interface where you can have sort of one control domain instead of trying to work out how does AWS do the networking, how does Azure do the networking, how does Alibaba do the networking, et cetera.
Yes, and that's got operational but also security advantages. So the thing that's been happening is I think these companies have been moderately successful, largely getting into very big companies who've got a particular problem. And Alkira has been able to grow substantially off the back of revenues that it's taken in. But this 100 million is kind of a sign that this network as a service market is working. Like, you don't get 100 million in the current marketplace unless you've got a compelling story, to my mind. So I think this might see Alkira start to make inroads into the second tier of corporate. So let's say you take out the top 500 to 1,000 companies, there's a whole market then below that of people who could start to take advantage of this, and maybe we'll see more of them in the public market. And it's a bit of a vote of confidence in the fact that they're making ground here.
Yeah, maybe, I guess another way to look at it is these investors already put $616 million into this, and maybe $100 million will just sort of get them over the top. The sort of sunk cost fallacy that also could be at play here, because $716 million is a lot for this space. So yeah, I'm having a little bit of a hard time seeing it as a good sign, but I take your point.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the other people in this space, it's not overly busy. Like, there's not a million competitors, and if you look at the incumbents, like what Cisco's doing with its multi-cloud networking, it's really not competitive against these people.
Right.
Against the Alkira et al. It's fine if you're a certain type of customer, you've got modest requirements, but these other solutions are doing so much more, and it really gives, there's a whole market still for them.
And I do take your point that if you are a very large company with a global presence and a global cloud presence across multiple cloud providers, then this could be a very attractive solution. And maybe that's why, to me, the sort of NAS market went a little quiet after it first came out, and maybe because they're just working with such large companies that they haven't had to go out and try to talk to the next tranche of the market. So that might also be what's going on here. They've sort of locked in those big companies and now looking to expand outward.
The cloud companies themselves have been putting out their own products as well. So we've seen SD-WAN, SASE products from AWS, Azure, for example, which muddies the water. And, do they have to include that in their product portfolio? It's a very messy marketplace and, potentially very expensive. It's not like Nvidia, which is almost like a one-trick pony. We made those GPUs and now we sell them for $1 squillion a piece. Whereas every time a new feature or function comes out, they have to continue the development cycle and respin, but that doesn't add any value. Like for every proprietary extension Google creates, or Huawei, I didn't put it in the show notes, but Huawei is rolling out its cloud in a country in Egypt. That's where it is. So if you're suddenly going to start saying we have to add Huawei cloud in Egypt to our list, it's like that's expensive. And is there any value associated to that? Do you have to cover everything? It's a difficult market. It's not as straightforward as.
Yeah. Moving on, tech workers in Kenya have written an open letter to President Biden asking to halt union busting activities in African countries by U.S. tech companies and hold U.S. tech companies to account for labor and human rights violations. The tech workers say they're employed as content moderators and data labelers for companies such as Meta, OpenAI, and others. These workers help identify and scrub some of the most vile content from the web from these systems for long hours and low pay. They say they value these jobs and that the employment they provide, but they're looking for better wages and healthcare, particularly mental health care, to address having to look at violence, abuse, and other horrific content hour after hour, day after day. The letter alleges that companies such as Meta and Scale AI have fired African workers who try to organize unions, or they simply exit the country, and wages for work already done are going unpaid. I essentially raised the story because it's a reminder that for all the focus on technological things like AI, there are still humans behind these technologies doing difficult work and hugely profitable tech companies that aren't necessarily treating these workers fairly.
Very difficult one, isn't it? Because every time we find out that AI is basically a bunch of squirrels in a trench coat, we're always a bit. People do, and there's a big foo-furrah going around this week where Google's latest AI engine, which was much touted at the Google I/O conference, is suddenly saying that the best way to make pizza is to include glue in the recipe. And it turns out that there was an article on Reddit that said the best way to keep cheese stuck to the top of the pizza so it doesn't slip off is to add a cup of glue to the recipe. And now Google is taking Reddit as a high confidence source. And that's what these people do, right? That's genuine, by the way. So I don't, and as you say, these people have to either be for detecting, undesirable content. Somebody's got to do it. And there's something in this. It must be awful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to have the thing is, we like it. The tech companies make it look like this is all just computers doing the work, when in fact there are humans behind it doing very difficult work that should be fairly compensated. And the whole union busting thing, I also have an issue with. So, links in the show notes if you want to read up more on it. And I saw a similar example of what you're talking about with the vaunted powers of AI. It was somebody who did a search asking about. Can I eat rocks to get minerals into my diet? And the AI response was basically, yes, here's an article that says it's good for you. And in fact, the article was from The Onion, which is a satirical newspaper here in the US. So yeah,
and went on to say which rocks you should be and how much rock you should be consuming in a day.
And apparently the reason that it got sucked in as a valid source is not because it was from The Onion, but because I guess like a mining company reposted that article on its own website as a gag, like, haha, isn't this funny? Yeah. And then I thought, oh, well, this is a reputable source.
See what I said earlier about AI is still got a road to travel.
It does.
And I am not at all sure. And I know that all these companies are investing huge amounts and they want to see a return, and that is not unreasonable. But equally, should they be shipping these products so early? Maybe they need to work on the whole process. It's like I'm increasingly convinced that OpenAI is a bust. I was just thinking, this is like an example of why AI is further away than we think. Everybody who's in AI is all hyping it up and boosting it. And increasingly, I'm of the view that AI is much further away than we think. And while I respect the fact that these companies are expending huge amounts of money and using AI or promoting AI, and they want a return on that money, I actually think they're being probably overspending pointlessly. And the actual gap here is that it's much further off than we think. And this is an example of that. There's people in the back doing high-value, low-paid work. It's not all automated. It's expensive and hard to do.
All right, a couple more stories before we wrap. First, Nvidia announced financial results for its first fiscal quarter of 2025. The company had revenues of $26 billion for the quarter, up 262% over the previous year. Net income was $14.8 billion, up 628% over last year. By segment, data center was the main driver, bringing in revenues of $22.6 billion. Gaming revenue was $2.6 billion. Nvidia's professional visualization and automotive and robotics divisions each brought in less than $1 billion, so we know where the money is.
And once upon a time, gaming was the big hope of Nvidia. Do you remember that?
I do.
This idea of, and they were all in with this gaming because, gaming is such a huge amount of money and, getting more involved in bringing titles, and they were going to replace Steam as the platform of the future and all this sort of stuff. It is interesting to see how quickly companies can turn around. There's two things that I thought of when talking about this. Is obviously the money, and if you want to go and look up the financial information. The first one was, if you're an Nvidia salary slave that gets stock options, you'd be pretty excited about this.
Absolutely.
I know that Nvidia is hiring huge numbers of people. It's all over LinkedIn. There's just people joining in swarms. So yay for them. But I also starting to wonder just how much Nvidia's success here, like outstanding, mind-boggling success, is distorting the technology market. Like, investors are looking at what Nvidia's doing and the huge profit margins. And I wonder if the investors are now going to go to the technology companies and saying, look, you should be doing this as well. You should have these same profit margins. Why is it that Cisco, you have such lousy profit margins? I mean, Cisco's an enormous profit-generating business. It generates a huge amount of profit margins and free cash flow, and then goes off and buys shares back all the time. But they're saying now, look at Nvidia, it's making like 70% gross margins, and you're on, 70% net margins. Why aren't you? And I'm concerned about that, because the expectation is that technology companies have all got products of the same value as AI, and therefore they should be able to charge more. And we're going to see much higher pricing placed on technology because investors expect it, because Nvidia set the bar. I'm a little frightened of that approach.
Yeah, my worry is that when you see, returns up 628%, and then investors are coming to other companies like, well, are you going to get that kind of growth? And they're like, well, we're shoving AI into everything, so hopefully, fingers crossed. It's making me think of that new recall feature in Microsoft, which we didn't talk about, that's using quote unquote AI to essentially spy on you. And the impetus probably is like, investors are like, AI makes money. Are you in AI? So yes, this is definitely having, I think, a distorting effect on the market.
Well, AI doesn't make money.
Well,
that's the point, is AI doesn't make money. So,
well, it does for Nvidia, but everybody else who's buying Nvidia is like, I hope this works. I'm going to keep cranking the handle until it works.
Up until now, companies have been able to say, I'm doing AI, and the share price, or at least not fallen, right? And so that's worth doing. If you can, spend $50 million on an AI strategy and get $1 billion worth of shareholder value, that's a profit, right? At least in some. But I do think there's an accounting going to be happening here, where this stuff starts to turn around and comes back on a different sort of a curve. And this distortion of just how much profits Nvidia is able to generate makes me think that the investors are to these other companies and saying, well, Nvidia was able to do AI and generate this, huge amounts of growth and outsized profit margins. Why aren't you?
Yep.
And those companies are going to be forced to raise their prices in some way, right? Or reduce their costs to reflect the fact that their AI is, doing something. And that to me ends up feeling like an Enron or a General Electric. Do you remember GE in the old days when Jack Welch was in charge? And he just started cutting headcount, got rid of the middle management, and the numbers were great until all of a sudden it didn't work. There wasn't enough middle managers. There was not enough workers. The company was top heavy with too many executives and not enough downstairs. And the company went bust in the end because they just kept cutting and cutting and cutting, and nothing was left. And it's a potential outcome.
Yeah, I think there's that, and also the fact that, poorly thought out or not thought out at all AI features and capabilities are going to get rolled out at lightning speed without any worry about potential repercussions, just because there's so much pressure to sort of ride this AI wave and try to, in some way, at a fraction, mimic the results that NVIDIA is getting, which nobody else is going to be able to duplicate. And I also wonder, when NVIDIA stops performing like this, what the backlash will be. Because this can't go on forever either. 628% increases year over year. Cannot keep up.
Yeah, and when you look at the profit margins, it's like, basically all of the AI sales is profit. They don't even TSMC's off manufacturing, and TSMC's getting 60-70% grow more, except they just don't have it. Takes time to manufacture chips or to install more machines and build more plants and so forth. So, but the distortion is real. I definitely think people are saying, We investors are going to the technology companies and saying, well, if you've got AI, you should have the same profit margins as Nvidia. And if you're a CEO and your investors are telling you that, what do you do? Say, no, we're not doing AI. It's far too early. It's not practical. That's not going to fly. That's death.
Yes, that's the exit. They show you the exit if you say that.
Yep.
All right, last story for the day. SpaceX released a brief video demonstration of a video call made from a smartphone directly to a SpaceX satellite and back down to another cell phone on a terrestrial network. SpaceX is partnering with U.S. telco T-Mobile on cell-to-satellite offerings. The two companies have been working on this project since 2022. SpaceX says the service should go live later this year. That's according to a story in CNET.
There's a few things here. One is because SpaceX doesn't have a media team, all we get is someone's random phone video twatted out by the company. So it's not exactly a convincing press release, Drew.
Well, there is no press release, and it's not a very convincing video either. It's very brief and not very high quality. So still, I think a respectable feat, but
there's lots of claims and not much evidence, shall we say?
Yes,
and it does look like somebody's at the club at 3 a.m.
Yes.
But anyway, that said, the point is that SpaceX is claiming that the relationship it had with T-Mobile, we talked about this about 2 years ago, maybe 3.
Yep.
There's a saying they can do direct from mobile to their satellites.
Yeah, with unmodified phones.
At this point, SpaceX has only launched about 30 unmodified phones, which is something that happened about 6 years ago. And there's a bunch of companies that are coming up with something in the space. Obviously, Apple was the first to do it just for text messages.
Right.
But this is rumored to be up to 17 megs. Given that SpaceX is exaggerating what it can do, especially when Elon's involved, let's have some caution there and see what turns up. But my point is that SpaceX has only launched about 30 satellites with this capability at this stage. And before this can be rolled out to a significant user base, they need hundreds of these satellites being placed into orbit to replace the ones that we've got. And that's going to take several years, no matter how hard you try. I mean, you're talking hundreds and hundreds of satellites that have to be launched and replacing the ones that are there. That's not something that's going to happen in 6 months. That's a couple of years. So, yes, very exciting, but let's have as a reality check, let's just realize that all of the satellites in orbit have to be replaced to get that. Sure, the satellites can be done over the US or over Europe or whatever, but that's not what's happening here. It's years away.
Yeah, the initial plan is to fortify places where T-Mobile doesn't have great cellular coverage. So that's a good use case for this thing. The other question is, how does it get billed? What does the billing look like? And if you accidentally, I guess, roam from a terrestrial network to a satellite network, are you going to be surprised by a big bill?
Yeah, that would be it. Well, that's why SpaceX has to partner with T-Mobile in the US, and it's going to partner with telcos in each country. So they might carry the traffic, but they'll just be an MVNO, mobile virtual network operator. And so they'll be able to, charge back for the bandwidth that travels over the network. Question, how are you going to know that your phone is set to satellite or whether it's on terrestrial?
Right.
Because that means your phones have to be, not physically modified with new antennas and a whole new, like a sat phone with the, the pop-up antenna in the movies.
Yeah.
When we talk about unmodified, we don't actually mean unmodified software. We talk about unmodified hardware, more or less. So there's a lot of hurdles here. So I just want to express some caution and say, let's make sure we keep it real.
But we do have a link in the show notes to the demo if you want to check it out for yourself. That does wrap up the news. We don't have anything else. So, Greg, where can folks find you online if they want to connect?
I've been expostulating over on LinkedIn lately, dropping out little nuggets of thought and wisdom, mostly just nuggets, I would say. But if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, but also on the Packet Pushers pages, each of the shows has its own page. So if you want to follow a particular podcast like Network Break or Heavy Strategy or Packet Protector, go over on LinkedIn and find us there and subscribe to those pages. Yep, same for me. I'm Drew Conry Murray. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to connect there. I'm also blogging at packetpushers and on our Packet Pusher Slack if you want to check that out. That does wrap up the show. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Network Break. If you like the show, we'd love a recommendation on Apple Podcasts, or you could tell your friends about the episode and share it with them. We appreciate that. As always, thanks for listening.